consider Mr. Here, colleagues, friends, students here. I think I am here primarily because of Professor Raman Madan, one of the finest minds I have interacted with as a teacher in the Jawaharlal University. His faith, his trust, and his goodwill have brought a person like me here. Because I am not a seminar man. Seldom do I move from my classroom, the space from where I derive the meaning of my life and derive the joy and experience. Nor am I a profound researcher in the field of education and university the way most of you present here. I'm simply a teacher, and that's all. And I'm here these 3 days, I'll be staying here, and I'm here to learn. What else does a teacher do, dear friends, except undertaking this endless journey, this continual process of learning and unlearning? So I'm here primarily for that. So for God's sake, friends, what I'm going to say in the 30 minutes, don't take it as a typical inaugural speech like a sermon. Instead, see it as one of my favorite philosophers, Habermas, would have characterized it as a certain kind of communicative action, not a strategic action, not an instrumental action. A mode of communication without hierarchy, without manipulation, communication that invites reciprocity, interrogation, questioning, and dialogue. I think that all of you present here would agree with me, and that is why this seminar is all about, that when we talk about education, we are not saying that education is only the process of transmission of social heritage from one generation to another. We are also not saying that education is primarily the acquisition of some kind of technical skill for getting a job and earning livelihood. We are also not saying that education is primarily the mastery of certain branches of academic knowledge. All these are important. All these are definitely important at their legitimacy. But we are here searching something else. And that's why the central theme of the seminar, domination, emancipation, and self-dignity. So all of us present here, I assure, are going beyond the immediate meaning of education, just as the transmission of social heritage from one generation to another, or acquisition of certain kind of skills for a job or livelihood, or the mastery of certain branches of knowledge. We are going far deeper, and in these 3 days we'll try to go deeper. We are essentially searching a kind of education that illuminates human souls, liberates us from the practices and ideologies of domination which degrade self-worth and human dignity, and striving for a kind of learning that enables us to live deeply, meaningfully with human dignity. Now that is what this seminar is all about. We all are trying to strive for that. So when we speak of domination, emancipation, and dignity, now we all know, and no discourse on education is possible to do without looking at that entire rainbow of the spectrum of social philosophers who from time to time reminded us of the ideologies of domination and how to liberate ourselves from the ideologies of domination and strive for self-worth and human dignity. Recall that old-fashioned man with extraordinary beard and great eyes, Karl Marx, and see, for example, the way that Marx was talking about. And Marx, a careful reader of Marx, would always concede that here was a man who sought to liberate us from the ideology, from an ideology that normalizes alienation, fragmentation, and exploitation. And he wanted to liberate us from this ideology and the practice of domination by doing a very creative interplay with Hegel's idealism and Feuerbach's materialism, and argued that true human dignity is possible in a society that is being characterized by love. And communism, as Marx would write in one of his manuscripts in 1844, communism is the unfoldment of love. And it is love that transcends alienation, fragmentation, division, and duality, as opposed to the wounded existence of man, that is the alienated existence in which man lives in an exploitative, divided society. And when you look at Sigmund Freud, who any reader of Civilization and its discontents would argue, was unlike Marx, not such a pessimist, not such an optimist person about the destiny of human civilization. But yet, throughout his trajectory, Sigmund Freud, in some way or other, tried to liberate mankind from the burden of the unconscious, from the burden of the unconscious, and the way the unconscious is filled with insatiable instincts and drives, and how to liberate humankind from the burden of the unconscious and restore human dignity through a very creative process of sublimation and creativity, thereby leading humankind to overcome the possibility of falling into the trap of potential disorder, mental disorder, and neurosis and breakdown. Both Marx and Freud, we all know, had tremendous impact on a set of libertarian Western thinkers who emerged in the 20th century and reminded us once again of the ideology of domination and the need for a search for emancipation. They entered the New Left and the Frankfurt School of Marxism that emerged out of this engagement with Marx and Freud. So we found people like Erich Fromm and Herbert Marcuse, who again and again reminded us of the need to liberate ourselves from the ideology of mass psychology of fascism, technocratic consciousness, authoritarian personality, all that lead to the degradation of human life and human being. When you look at our own civilization and own country, three names in that quick spectrum, as I recall, three names immediately come to our mind. And anyone working in the field of education sees this. On the one hand, Gandhi, with a very beautiful mix of his spiritual asceticism and some sort of a gentle anarchy, wanted to liberate us from greed, aggression, and hyper-masculinity of colonial modernity. And he felt that the human dignity and the self-worth lies in certain kind of oceanic circles or a decentralized community fulfilling itself in certain kind of a charade that would lead to, and which he learned from John Ruskin by integrating the manual on physical and the intellectual, leading to certain kind of a basic education or the integral education, as opposed to a very divided, fragmented kind of life. So the way he was linking education with his broader philosophy and his profound critique of colonial modernity with its implicit principles of aggression, greed, and hyper-masculinity, and imagining a kind of charade that is based on the decentralized participatory communes and leading to paraphrase Ruskin's word, the integration of the manual and the intellectual. Likewise, Ambedkar, Gandhi's contemporary, was deriving his inspiration primarily from two sources. One is, of course, the three fundamentals of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. The second, at the later stage, is engagement with Gautam Buddha's Dhammapada. And that led Ambedkar to derive his inspiration from these ideologies of emancipation, and particularly the emancipation of people who have lost their self-worth and dignity from an ideology of a hierarchical, oppressive caste system, and giving birth to a new notion of man, this man with self-worth and dignity, overcoming the tyranny of a ruthlessly hierarchical caste system, and deriving his inspiration from both Gautam Buddha philosophers, Comparative, and as well as French Revolution, with three fundamental principles: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And when Tagore, who unlike Gandhi and Ambedkar, was engaged in the domain of aesthetics and creativity, and Tagore sought to liberate his writings and essays of education and philosophy, wanted to liberate us, once again, deriving his inspiration from both Upanishadic universalism as well as poetic cosmopolitanism and the poetic sensibilities. He wanted to liberate us from, again, all sorts of fragmentation, mechanization, and limiting identities, including the ideology of nationalist chauvinism and the nationalist aggression. So all that limits one's origin, all that lead to fragmentation, mechanization, regimentation, Tagore was extremely critical of that. His sensitivity lies in Upanishadic universalism and certain kind of poetic cosmopolitanism. And that led him to critique all that limits our origin. And friends, where does he find the dignity that we are talking about? He finds his dignity in what he wrote in another remarkable book, The Religion of Man, Man's Surplus. And the surplus he would characterize as all that which enables humankind to go beyond mere utility and to experience the abundance of his possibilities, infinite possibilities in the aesthetics of nature, the abundance of nature, and in a deeper engagement with something which is broader, which is universal, rather than limited, constant, which lead to fragmentation. I'm talking about, I'm just in this seminar before it begins, just revising, and all of you are well versed in these philosophies, but I'm just invoking them here at the beginning, because all those educationists, activists, and the philosophers who are asking the kind of question which you are asking in this seminar, how do we overcome domination and restore human dignity, create an emancipatory form of learning and education? All those who talk about that, think about that, in some way or other have been influenced or critically engaging with this kind of philosophy that I just talked about. Just to recall, in the 20th century, a Marxist philosopher like Azim, when he, in a very extraordinarily brilliant way, analyzes the notion of ideology and goes beyond the classical Marxian notion of ideology and talks about the ideological state apparatus, both the repressive state apparatus and the ideological state apparatus. And the way Althusser would argue how in 20th century, unlike the earlier time, it was not the religion, but it is the school and the education that became a major component of the ideological apparatus of the state, and how schools instead inculcate certain kind of values, certain kind of aspirations that legitimate the class division and the class inequality. For a man like Pierre Bourdieu, the darling of the people in the educational circle, every educationist is fond of quoting Pierre Bourdieu time and again. When one talks about that entire notion, school is not a neutral institution. School is not a neutral institution. Because all that happens in schools, the way it classifies people, the way it processes knowledge and defines legitimate knowledge, is already biased to the cultural capital of the privileged sections of the society. And it leads to the social, it leads to the reproduction of the existing inequality, rather than transforming it revolutionary and deeply. So be it Althusser, be it Pierre Bourdieu, the philosophers you and I often talk about when we work in the field of education. See the ideological things, how they engage with the people like Marx, with the people like Max Weber, how they engaged with them and came forward with this kind of question. And friends, what about our own Anish Gopals and Krishna Kumars? In some way or other, they were deeply influenced by this spectrum of philosophy of emancipation that inspire us to critique the principles of domination and talk about certain kind of world unity. But the reason why I am invoking this philosopher is particular. The reason is that I believe, and my sociological imagination informs me, and I like to believe that no discussion on education, particularly in this conference and seminar, is possible without looking at somewhat critically the emerging forces in the country, which in some way are further legitimating the principles of domination. What is that emerging force? That if we, in the language of political sociology, if we use it, the emerging forces in the country are essentially trying to integrate the following. On the one hand, the worldwide onslaught of a neoliberal economy of global capitalism, characterized by a mythology of development, which is being perpetually propagated through the television industry, through the culture industry, and through a large propaganda machineries. And third, it is integrated with the very emergent militant politics of cultural nationalism. So a neoliberal global economy with its notion of development, sanctioned, legitimated by the propaganda machinery of the culture industry, further reinforced by a very newly assertive political ideology of a very militant, aggressive cultural nationalism. Now we are working under these emerging forces, and these forces, in some way or other, are further legitimating the principles of domination, which many of you present here in your deliberation and paper, I believe, would reflect on when you strive for emancipation and for dignity. See its implications. Simply, there are three implications of these emergent forces, particularly in the field of education, which are obvious to you and me. You and I need not be a philosopher or an intellectual to make sense of these implications. See the first implication of this kind of an argument. First, it is leading to a very hyper-competitive culture for access to limited, scarce resources. And as a result, what is happening, which would be a nightmare for any emancipatory philosopher or thinker of education, this hyper-competitive culture for access to the limited, scarce resources, creating a certain kind of social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, social Darwinism and survival of the fittest. And as a result, what happens is that this sort of hyper-competitive culture for access to limited educational resources, creating an educational and academic milieu in which we are seeing the following. We are seeing, for example, the proliferations in every lane and the byline of the country, and Kota in Rajasthan is, in a way, for example, is the center of gravity of that pathology. In shops for the coaching centers, for the entrance test for innumerable medical and engineering shops. It also leads to a massive disorder, psychic disorder and the neurotic disorder. The other day, Indian Express carried a report. This year itself, 27 young minds have committed suicide in Kota town. And also it leads to another pathology, the reduction of serious bodies of knowledge into certain kind of ready-made manual or the guidebooks, be it for the UPSC exam or for the LIT exam or for all sorts of competitive exams. So the reduction of a very serious inquiry, serious body of knowledge into certain kind of cheap manuals and the guidebooks and the inevitable coaching centers leading to massive psychic and the neurotic disorder and creating a culture of social Darwinism. It is a kind of education in which there is no sunrise, there is no sunset, no Walt Whitman exists in that moment. No T.S. Eliot exists in that culture of learning. There is no wonder of Einstein or Newton in that culture of learning. It dictates human dignity. It is against equity and justice because it is centered on social Darwinism and survival of the fittest. And the character of a learner, a typical learner that emerges out of that kind of system, has got nothing to do with the dignity, the dignified human life. Absolutely competitive, potentially neurotic, and subject to mental disorder at any time. That's the state of a learner that the machine is producing, that the machine is bringing about. The second implication of this culture of learning is that friends, it is becoming excessively difficult to reduce evil. But in a different language, Habermas would argue colonization of the life world. The system, the market, colonizes every sphere, and it colonizes the culture of education. It colonizes the culture of learning. And the paradox is that this colonization looks like beautiful. This colonization appears to be beautiful because the propaganda machinery of development lobby would often treat it in that manner, that after all, this is creating human resources, and educational institutions' primary task is the production of these human resources to be fitted into the emerging sector of development and industries, leading to devaluation of foundation disciplines like physics, like literature, like history, like philosophy, or the music, and instead creating a branch of knowledge that the market values as the most utilitarian branch of knowledge, from fashion designing to the hotel management. These are the stories after stories of endless education shops which are emerging throughout the country, with an assumption that this colonization of the market or the colonization of the library is inevitable because it leads to development, and this development means you and I have to create human resources for the emerging development sector and industries. So if theoretical physics doesn't work, if a research in ancient Indian history doesn't work, if a work in literature doesn't give you a job, start now hotel management, fashion designing, and all that which the market values at the signifies. So it creates another vacuum at the fire in the culture of learning and education. And third, what is happening that with that we are finding the generation of, we are finding the very paradox of that kind of a developmental model, which long back Latin American political theorists have talked about underdevelopment of development. So side by side with this, we could see, since this education attracts the urban elite, aspiring middle class, and the rural elite, it becomes too heavy, its cost becomes too heavy to bear. So as a result, already it isolates, insulates, excludes a large section of people. And this underdevelopment would manifest itself in stories of thousands of ordinary educational institutions in the country, para teachers with poor salary, schools without infrastructure, mass copying, massive dropout, and universities and colleges with demotivated students and teachers, but the colleges and the universities are reduced into factories for the distribution of degrees and diplomas. So that is why the bridge of development of this institution, side by side, the stories of darkness and underdevelopment. That's the paradox of this kind of a model. And the third consequence, which I believe is happening, is that many of these institutions do not encourage a nuanced public sphere, leading to a culture of reflexivity, criticality, and debate. As a result, what happens that we are creating a generation of learners equipped with technocratic consciousness, but politically, culturally, and socially illiterate. So it's a strange generation that is being created, that the technocratic consciousness with a specialized skill, but with absolute void as far as the social, political, and the cultural sensitivities and sensibilities are concerned. Because most of these institutions would not encourage any meaningful public space, public sphere, leading to a culture of debate, contestation, and reflection on issues which Habermas thought, which are very important for the democratic governments. That in the public sphere, you and I come, talk, reflect, debate, this declining public sphere, as Habermas would argue, the way the colonization takes place and the market begins to colonize the life form and the education. That lead to a generation of learners with a technocratic consciousness, but completely devoid of social and cultural literacy. Almost a ground which in the earlier times, New Left philosophers did talk about, almost a new form of social control and the ground of another kind of authoritarianism. Authoritarianism with multiple television channels, authoritarianism with shopping malls, authoritarianism with periodic elections after every 5 years. But it's a new form of authoritarianism, and that, I think, the seat is being filled. So these implications are fairly obvious. When India got independence, after a prolonged struggle for liberation from the colonial rule, none of the great educationists possibly thought of the existing state of affairs that we are seeing in 2015. Neither Radhakrishnan nor T.S. Kothari imagined, thought of, or pleaded for this kind of education. Not did Maulana Azad, not did Zakir Hussain ever imagine or ever think of this state of education. I am not here, because the time is limited, to talk about the kind of analysis that political philosophers like Rajni Kothari argued, that how the post-colonial state, post-47, after a momentary romance with the Nehruvian euphoria of Fabian socialism, slowly and slowly began to fade away, fell, and got increasingly dissociated from society, state without society, dissociated from society and people, and eventually in the 90s, the emergence of throughout the world and the emergence of the neoliberal global economy and how technocratic consciousness began to replace politics. And it is where the large section of philosophers, Rajni Kothari, Ashish Nandi, and many others, who try to see the destiny of post-colonial Indian society and the post-colonial Indian state. I am not going into details there, but I am rather asking a simple question, which many of you, I believe, would ask. I am asking a question that, is there then a way out? Is there then a way out? And if there is domination, and we understand that what this domination is all about, but the seminar is talking about emancipation and dignity. Now, is there a way out? Can we strive for human dignity and emancipation? And this is a question that I am asking, which every morning I ask myself when I come to the classroom as a teacher. Every educator and every teacher, I ask this question again and again. What am I doing? What is the purpose of my life? What do I teach? Why do I teach? Or how do I disseminate the values? So who is a teacher? Now that's the question that confronts me. And in the coming next 5 minutes, I just wish to throw some light on that. And as I've said, it's a Habermasian public space and communicative action, full of debate, dialogue, so don't take it as an absolute word, contestful and interrogative. Now, I tend to feel that when I ask this question, then on the one hand, my sociological theories, my sociology takes me to the world of pessimism, because the structure is overwhelmingly powerful. The structure is overwhelmingly powerful over human lives. It is so difficult to fight this hyper-competitive culture which is implicit in the new model of economy, the global capitalism and the neoclassical neoliberal notion of economic development. It's so difficult to reduce the structure of the entire propaganda machinery and the culture industry, causing a mythology of development. And it is so difficult to hide the very organized politics of cultural nationalism. Structure is so overwhelmingly powerful over human lives. So on the one hand, the pessimism of a sociologist, pessimism of an analyst, pessimism of the intellect. But then as a teacher, I ask myself, I cannot exist merely through the pessimism of intellect or pessimism of an analysis. So the next 5 minutes, I want you to move from the pessimism of intellect to the optimism of the teacher, to the optimism of women. For Gramsci would argue, pessimism of intellect to the optimism of women. So from the pessimism of intellect, I wish to come to the optimism of the teacher. And I think it is very difficult to sustain in this vocation. Here has become great, JNU classrooms. And it is very difficult to sustain without certain fundamental life-affirming principle of activism. You cannot become a teacher. You cannot remain a teacher without that inherent principle of hope, faith, and optimism. And each morning when you come to the class and see the bright faces of your minds, you feel that another morning, you begin the day with a sense of gratitude. Another morning, another flower is waiting to bloom. And the teacher is like a gardener. So this is where, that's the optimism of the world. And I would argue that a teacher inherently ought to be potentially creative and life-affirming. And creative and life-affirming, when I say, I mean he or she ought to be guided by the tremendous will and the energy to make a difference, no matter how insignificant it appears, no matter how small it is, in the space that he or she occupies. And that space is his college, the classroom, the university, primarily the classroom, where the teacher engages with the young learners and the children. And from there, I see the optimism of the will rather than the pessimism of intellect. And here I would argue that a teacher of that kind ought to be inherently pluralist. A teacher cannot, a teacher of my imagination cannot afford to be casteist or racist, aggressively nationalist or violently patriarchal. A teacher of that kind cannot afford to. He cannot afford to be a casteist or racist or nationalistic or violently patriarchal. A teacher of that kind ought to be inherently pluralist and creative. And a teacher of that kind would acquire the courage and the dignity to believe and to disseminate it that knowledge is not for domination. Knowledge is not for control. Knowledge is essentially for self-illumination. And the wonder of science, the reflexivity of social sciences and humanities, and the aesthetics of art form, a good teacher ought to be guided by the wonder of science, the aesthetics of humanities, and the reflexivity of social sciences. And that would orient, and that would lead to a notion of a knowledge, where knowledge, apart from being a tool of control and domination, knowledge begin to illuminate our human consciousness. A teacher of that kind would succeed in overcoming what Michael Apple would have characterized as the tyranny of officially sanctioned legitimate curricula. A teacher of that kind would acquire the courage and the dignity to invoke and to invite in his classroom, right from those 1937, Nandalal Bosche's famous portrait, where Nandalal Bosch came from Shantiniketan and Gandhi invited him in the Haripura Indian session of the National Congress to draw the pictures and the portrait. And he came with his students from Shantiniketan. And some of the famous posters and the portrait he made of a tailor, of a painter, of a worker, of an ordinary man with the struggle, symbolizing the aspiration of a new India that people like Gandhi, Ambedkar, and others were visualizing. So Nandalal Bosch's that imagination, that aesthetics and critical consciousness of an artist, a teacher of that kind would invoke him. A teacher of that kind would time and again remind her students that how in colonial India, despite the tyranny and the hegemony of patriarchal Brahminic Hinduism, there was a man, woman like Savitri Phule, who together with her husband would acquire the courage to fight it and give her life for the education of the girls. A teacher of that kind would remind the students that Allama Iqbal is not just 1937 speech in the Indian Muslim League Conference. Allama Iqbal's heart pains, the poetry of pain and anguish, the moment Iqbal saw the discord and the disunity and the disorder. A teacher of that kind, by nature, overcome the multiplicity of voices, overcome the hegemony of the principle of domination and control. Now, and I keep saying it because I believe that it is very, and as a teacher, and I just wish to share it with you, that it is very difficult, to remain indifferent to what the philosophers like Martin Buber and Paul Freire talk about that. Martin Buber's arch for the ideal relationships as opposed to the I-8 engagement and the Paul Freire's dialogue and the Tagore and Tolstoy. Now these are the people, these are the thinkers, the philosophical foundation that give the strength to the teacher, to derive the principle for fighting the principles of domination and giving a new meaning to knowledge with the wonder of science and the reflexivity of critical social sciences and the aesthetics of art. And many of you might ask, is it possible? I will always give an answer. Don't ask this question to anyone. Ask this question to yourself. There is nobody to answer this question for you. If you go by the pessimism of an intellect, you end up just analyzing the principles of domination. You would not be able, you would only say that why domination exists. But if you go with the will of a teacher, will of an educator and a pedagogue, then suddenly some possibilities begin to emerge and evolve. And I believe that this seminar is not just the pessimism of intellect. This seminar is also, for Gramsci would argue, if you are a Marxist, you would say Gramscian counter-hegemony, or if you are a Gandhian, you would argue it is certain kind of a Shodha. But my appeal to you is not to get carried away by the semantics of it, whether it is Gramscian counter-hegemony or Gandhian Shodha. That semantics would create all that trouble. Instead, what I'm trying to say is that let's try to understand the fragrance of it, that what exactly we're trying to talk about, the fragrance of it. And that is where I believe the hope and the possibility lies. I just end this lecture with one of the famous novelists, one of my favorite famous novelists, Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky's one of the path-breaking novels, is Notes from Underground. And many of you, I'm sure, here have read that novel and see the nameless character in Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. He says, the character, that nameless character is saying that I'm an unattractive man. I am an ugly man. I am ashamed of myself. I am ugly. I am a spiteful man. And throughout this novel, small novel, this nameless character, unfolds his life. That why he sees himself that I'm ashamed of myself. I'm a spiteful man. I'm an ugly man. I have no dignity. I have no worth, no dignity. Time is not here to speak of that novel. But many of you, if you read, and many of you must have read it, and see that this character is saying, almost at the end of the novel, that I have, through a lot of encounters, saying that I am a spiteful man. I'm ashamed of myself. Because throughout my life, I have isolated myself from all that is real, all that is human, all that is alive. all that is non-credentials. I've isolated myself from all that. I've sucked away from life, from the vitality of life, from what is not credentials, what is authentic. I have not got the best of it. Now, when you read Dostoevsky, you feel that here is a grand novelist, who, on the one hand, there is a deep existential anguish about the question of meaning of life, about dignity, about the meaning of existence. But at the same time, there is a hidden deer in Dostoevsky. It's not just another existentialist like Japal Sartre. There is, for example, hidden deer in Dostoevsky. And that hidden deer is that, together with the narration of the existential anguish and the meaninglessness that the nameless character passes throughout the novel, he is also striving for certain kind of a aesthetic and spiritual awakening. And that awakening is a search for dignity. It's a search for dignity, when the character would eventually be able, if he ever get, to feel the connectedness with life, the connectedness to the world. And when I read Dostoevsky, and I read him time and again, at the moment of pain, at the moment of difficulty, at the moment of existential anguish, and I feel that these two traits characterize this grand novelist, the existential anguish and this hidden tear, his strive for human worth and human dignity. And this is where, when I read, I feel that possibly that nameless character in Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground did not actually find a great teacher, educator, philosopher. He could not get that touch with the great teacher, educator, philosopher. Society without teachers, society without great teachers, pedagogues, is a doomed society. That would lead to more and more Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground. Many of you present here in these 3 days, I believe, would reflect on these questions. And thank you once again very much. With your patience, with love and gratitude, I intended you have listened to it. Thank you once again.